Persian Immortals, Lessons from History's Most Elite Fighting Force. Episode 97 of the Peak Performance Podcast. Welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast. I am Brad Young, and today we are going somewhere most people have never gone before. Not to a modern gym, not to a Silicon Valley biohacker's lab, not to the locker room of a professional sports team. Today, we're traveling back roughly 2,500 years to the beating heart of one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And inside that empire lived a unit of soldiers so extraordinary, so disciplined, so physically and mentally dominant that history remembers them simply as the Immortals. This is episode 97, and today's episode is going to read a little differently. Think of this less like a podcast and more like a book you can sit with, return to, and apply to your real life. Because the story of the Persian Immortals is not just a history lesson, it is a masterclass in peak performance, in how human beings, without modern science and without protein shakes, without GPS tracking or heart rate monitors, built themselves into an unstoppable force. And the lessons they left behind are just as powerful today as they were when Xerxes marched his armies across the known world. And so settle in, take a breath. And let's go back to ancient Persia, the empire that shook the world. To understand the Immortals, you first have to understand the world they were born into. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, which stretched from roughly 550 BCE to 330 BCE, was not merely a nation. It was the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. At its height under Darius the Great and later Xerxes, it covered over 2 million square miles, stretching from the Indus Valley in modern-day Pakistan all the way west to the edges of Greece and north into Central Asia. This empire managed dozens of different peoples, languages, and cultures under a single unified system of governance. The Persian kings were not simply warriors, they were administrators, diplomats, and visionaries. They built roads, they developed one of the earliest postal systems in history, and they created a military structure that was the envy of every rival power. At the core of that military structure was a single legendary unit, the 10,000, the Immortals. The Greek historian Herodotus gave them their famous name because of a peculiar, ingenious military practice. Whenever an immortal fell in battle, whether from illness, injury, or death, a replacement soldier stepped in immediately, maintaining the unit at exactly 10,000 men at all times. To the Persian Empire's enemies, watching from a distance, it appeared as though these warriors simply could not die. They were always 10,000. Always. No gaps, no weakness, no visible loss. It was psychological warfare at its finest, and it worked. But the legend of the Immortals goes far deeper than a clever headcount trick. These were the most carefully selected, most intensively trained, most specifically nourished soldiers of their age. Understanding how they operated gives us a blueprint for peak performance that still holds up today. Who were the Immortals? Selection and identity. The first lesson of the Immortals is one that modern performance culture is only beginning to rediscover. The people you choose matter more than almost anything else. The Immortals were not simply conscripted soldiers pulled from the general population. They were chosen through a rigorous selection process that valued not just physical ability, but character, loyalty, and cultural identity. Most Immortals were Persian or Median by birth, drawn from the two dominant ethnic groups of the Achaemenid Empire. Now, this was intentional. The Persian kings understood that shared identity creates cohesion, and cohesion creates strength. When you know the man beside you grew up in the same culture, worships the same God, and carries the same sense of honor, you fight differently. You fight for him as much as for yourself. Selection began young. Boys from noble and military families were identified early, often before the age of 10, and entered a structured developmental program. This was not optional enrichment. This was a total commitment of the child's life trajectory toward a singular purpose, becoming the best possible version of a warrior servant of the empire. The selection criteria valued three things above all else. First, physical robustness, the natural frame and health to withstand years of intense conditioning. Second, mental fortitude, the temperament to endure hardship without complaint, and to follow orders with precision and intelligence. Third, and perhaps most importantly, loyalty, a deep personal allegiance to the Persian king that went beyond mere obedience and bordered on devotion. This combination of physical potential, mental toughness, and unwavering loyalty created a foundation that no amount of training alone could manufacture. You can train a body, you can sharpen a mind, but you cannot install loyalty or identity after the fact. The Persians knew this, and they built their greatest military unit on that understanding. That is a lesson worth sitting with. The training of the Immortals, building a body for war. From the moment a young Persian boy entered the pipeline for potential immortal status, his life became structured around three pillars of development that the ancient Persian tradition explicitly named riding, archery, and truth-telling. That last one might surprise you. We will come back to it, but let us start with the physical. Riding was central to Persian military identity. From an early age, boys learned to handle horses with a level of skill that modern riders would find extraordinary. This was not recreational horsemanship. This was combat riding, learning to control an animal at full gallop while maintaining balance, managing equipment, and executing tactical maneuvers. The physical demands of this training were immense. Riding at high intensity develops the core muscles, the legs, the hips, and the lower back in ways that are difficult to replicate with any other form of exercise. It also requires a specific kind of neuromuscular awareness, a constant unconscious reading of the animal beneath you and the terrain ahead. Archery was the second pillar, and the Persian commitment to it was exceptional. Persian archers were among the most feared in the ancient world. The recurve bow they used required enormous upper body strength, particularly in the shoulders, the upper back, and the pulling arm. Developing the ability to draw a heavy war bow repeatedly, accurately, and under physical and psychological stress takes years of daily practice. The Immortals were trained to shoot from horseback, from fixed positions, and while moving on foot, a breadth of application that demanded versatility and total body conditioning. Beyond riding and archery, the physical training of young Persians included long-distance running, wrestling, swimming in rivers and lakes, and what we would today call loaded carries, moving heavy objects over distance as a way of building functional strength and mental endurance. There were no machines. There were no weight rooms. There was only the body, the land, and the will to push further than yesterday. Heat, cold, and the art of physical hardship. One of the most important and least discussed aspects of how the Immortals were forged was their deliberate exposure to environmental extremes. The Persian Empire spanned climates that ranged from scorching desert plains to high mountain passes with brutal winters. The Immortals were trained to operate effectively in all of them, and this environmental training was not accidental. It was a core part of the preparation process. Young trainees were deliberately sent into the desert during the hottest months, without shade and with limited water. Learning to ration their resources and manage their bodies under conditions that would incapacitate an unprepared person. They were also sent into cold mountain environments, learning to sleep on frozen ground, to maintain motor function with cold, stiffened hands, and to keep moving when every instinct screamed to stop. This kind of hardship training served a dual purpose. On the physical level, it built genuine heat and cold adaptation. The human body is remarkably capable of adjusting to temperature extremes when exposed gradually and repeatedly over time. Blood plasma volume increases. Sweat efficiency improves. The cardiovascular system becomes more capable of delivering oxygen to working muscles even when the environment is trying to shut the whole system down. These are real, measurable physiological adaptations, and the ancient Persians achieved them through systematic exposure long before anyone had a word for the science behind it. On the psychological level, the purpose was even more profound. When a soldier has already slept on frozen ground and kept fighting, when he has already marched through a desert with a dry mouth and aching legs and arrived at his destination and executed his mission, he carries a different kind of confidence into every subsequent challenge. He has evidence of his own capacity. He knows what he can do. That knowledge is not given to you by a coach or a book. It is earned through experience, and the Immortals earned it deliberately, systematically, and early. Eating like an immortal, ancient nutrition without modern supplements. Here's where things get genuinely fascinating for anyone who has spent time in the modern fitness and nutrition space. The Persian Immortals achieved extraordinary levels of physical performance without a single protein powder, energy drink, creatine capsule, or electrolyte pack. So, what did they eat? And what can we actually learn from it? The core of the ancient Persian diet was built around foods that were available, storable, and calorie dense enough to support hard physical labor. The staples included flatbreads made from barley and wheat, which provided complex carbohydrates for sustained energy. Legumes, lentils, chickpeas, and various beans were a primary source of plant-based protein and were eaten in large quantities. Dried fruits, particularly dates, figs, and pomegranates, were portable energy sources that could be carried on long marches and consumed without preparation. Lamb and goat were the most common animal proteins available to Persian soldiers, eaten during encampments and celebrations, but less frequently during active campaigns when preserving and transporting fresh meat was impractical. Dried and salted meats served as a field ration protein source, much as jerky would serve a modern hiker. Fish was consumed in coastal regions and along the major river systems. Dairy products, including yogurt and cheese made from goat and sheep milk, provided fat, protein, and the beneficial bacteria that support gut health, something modern science has only recently begun to understand is critical to overall performance and immune function. Olive oil was used both as a cooking fat and as a nutritional staple, providing dense caloric energy in what we now understand to be anti-inflammatory compounds. Honey served as both a sweetener and a medicinal agent, whereas the ancient Persians used it to treat wounds and as a quick energy source before or after physical exertion. Nuts, particularly walnuts and almonds, were eaten regularly and provided healthy fats, magnesium, and protein in a compact, portable form. What is remarkable about this dietary profile, viewed through the lens of modern nutritional science, is how closely it aligns with what we now know to be optimal for sustained high performance. High in complex carbohydrates for energy, adequate in protein from diverse sources rich in healthy fats, loaded with micronutrients from whole plant foods, and almost entirely free of processed sugar, refined grains, or artificial ingredients. The Immortals did not eat this way because they understood macronutrient ratios. They ate this way because it was what was available and what made them feel strong. But the result was the same. The role of spices and herbs, nature's performance enhancers. Before the supplement industry existed, there was the spice route, and the Persian Empire sat at the very center of the ancient spice trade. This was not merely a commercial advantage, it was a performance advantage that most people never think about when studying ancient military history. The Persian diet made extensive use of spices and herbs that we now know have significant physiological effects. Turmeric, which was used throughout the Persian world, contains curcumin, a compound with powerful anti-inflammatory properties that modern athletes now buy in capsule form for joint recovery. Saffron, one of Persia's most prized exports, has been shown in modern research to have mood-stabilizing and anti-anxiety effects, which would have real value in a soldier managing the psychological stress of combat. Cumin and coriander used daily in cooking support digestion and nutrient absorption. Garlic, a staple in ancient Persian cooking, has documented antimicrobial properties that would have helped soldiers resist infection in field conditions where sanitation was minimal. Pomegranate deserves special mention. The pomegranate was a sacred fruit in ancient Persian culture that appeared in their art, their religious ceremonies, and their daily diet. Modern research has identified pomegranate juice as one of the most potent natural sources of antioxidants available, with specific benefits for cardiovascular endurance, muscle recovery, and blood flow. The ancient Persians did not know any of this. They knew it tasted good, it gave them energy, and it was associated with strength and vitality in their culture. They were right for all the right reasons. The broader lesson here is one that modern nutrition science keeps rediscovering. Whole foods in their natural form contain compounds that work synergistically in ways that isolated supplements rarely replicate. The spice cabinet of an ancient Persian kitchen was, by accident of geography and culture, one of the most sophisticated natural performance support systems ever assembled, and it cost nothing except attention to what the earth provided. Sleep, rest, and recovery in the ancient world. We live in a culture that glorifies the grind. Sleep less, do more, hustle harder. This is sold to us as the path to peak performance, and it is one of the most damaging myths in modern achievement culture. The Persian immortals, whatever their many hardships in the field, understood something fundamental about rest that we have largely forgotten. Recovery is not the absence of training. Recovery is training. In the garrison environments where the immortals spent most of their peacetime, daily schedules were built around two hard physical sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, with a significant midday rest period during the hottest hours. This structure, which mirrors what we now call biphasic sleep or the Mediterranean siesta tradition, was not laziness, it was intelligent energy management. The human body's natural cortisol and alertness cycles support intense activity in the morning and again in the late afternoon, with a natural dip in the early afternoon. The ancient Persians built their day around biology, not ideology. Sleep itself was treated as sacred. In Persian culture, dreams were considered communications from the divine, specifically from Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of the Zoroastrian faith that most Persians followed. This meant that sleep was not merely tolerated, it was protected, respected, and structured into daily life with intentionality. Soldiers who were not on watch were expected to sleep fully. Sleep deprivation was not a badge of honor, it was a liability. Beyond nightly sleep, the concept of active recovery was embedded in Persian training culture through activities like walking, light stretching, swimming, and what we might call mindfulness in nature. Time spent in natural environments, often near water, that serve both physical and psychological recovery functions. The human nervous system, then as now, needs downtime to consolidate learning, repair tissue, regulate hormones, and prepare for the next challenge. The immortals gave their bodies that time, and it showed in their performance. The third pillar, truth-telling and mental discipline. Remember the three pillars of Persian education I mentioned earlier: riding, archery, and truth-telling. We have talked about the physical pillars. Now let us talk about the one that might seem strangest to a modern audience, but is in many ways the most important of all. In ancient Persian culture, truthfulness was not simply a moral virtue, it was a warrior virtue, a performance characteristic as essential as physical strength. The Persian king, Darius the Great, in his famous rock inscriptions at Behistun, listed the lie as one of the greatest evils a person could commit. This was not abstract philosophy. It was a practical principle for building trust, cohesion, and accountability in a military unit that had to function perfectly under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Here's why this matters for peak performance. When every member of a unit operates from a foundation of radical honesty with their commanders, with their fellow soldiers, and with themselves, the entire system becomes more efficient. There is no energy wasted on managing deception, maintaining false narratives, or protecting fragile egos. When a training assessment shows weakness, the weakness is acknowledged and addressed. When a strategy is failing, the failure is named and corrected. When a soldier is not ready, he says so rather than pushing into a situation where his unreadiness becomes a liability for everyone around him. Self-deception is one of the most common performance killers in modern life. We tell ourselves we trained hard enough when we went through the motions. We tell ourselves we are recovered when we are exhausted. We tell ourselves we are ready when we are afraid. The Persian emphasis on truth-telling was, at its core, a practice of self-awareness, of seeing yourself clearly without the comfortable distortions that protect the ego but undermine the performance. The Zoroastrian religious framework that most immortals operated within reinforced this. The cosmic battle between Ahura Mazda, the force of truth and light, and Angra Mainyu, the force of deception and darkness, was not just theology. It was a daily psychological frame. Every choice toward truth was a small victory in a battle that mattered. Every act of self-deception was a surrender to the dark. That is a remarkably powerful cognitive tool for maintaining personal discipline, and it costs nothing to use. Brotherhood, cohesion, and the performance of belonging. Modern sports psychology has a concept called team cohesion, and decades of research confirm that teams with high cohesion, where members feel genuine belonging, mutual trust, and shared purpose, consistently outperform more talented teams with lower cohesion. The Persian Immortals understood this not as a scientific principle, but as a lived reality, and they engineered their unit around it with extraordinary intentionality. Immortals lived together, trained together, ate together, traveled together, and in many cases were permitted to bring their families along on campaign, a practice that was unusual enough in the ancient world that the Greek historians who encountered them found it remarkable. Herodotus describes seeing wagons of women and servants following the Persian army, and while he noted it somewhat dismissively as luxury, he missed the deeper military logic. When a soldier knows his family's nearby, his commitment to the mission is total. There is no distance between his personal world and his professional purpose. He is not fighting for an abstraction. He is fighting for the people a few hundred yards behind him. Within the unit itself, pairs and small groups of immortals developed relationships of deep personal loyalty that functioned as performance multipliers. A soldier who will not quit for his own sake will quit for his partners. A man who will push through his own pain threshold will push further when someone beside him needs him to. This is not sentiment, this is documented psychology. The social bonds within elite military units are one of the most consistent predictors of performance under extreme stress. The Immortals also shared a distinctive visual identity. Their famous robes, their jewelry, their specific equipment that set them apart from every other soldier in the Persian army and in the known world. This was not vanity, it was identity engineering. When you look different, you are different. When you are visibly set apart, you carry that distinction with you into every moment of your day. The uniform is a constant reminder of who you are and what is expected of you. That psychological pressure is a feature, not a bug. Ritual, routine, and the architecture of daily excellence. One of the most underappreciated aspects of how the Immortals maintained their extraordinary performance standards over years and decades was their relationship with ritual and routine. In modern performance culture, we talk a lot about habits. The Immortals did not have the word, but they had the practice in its most complete form. The Zoroastrian religious tradition required its adherents to pray 5 times daily, but facing the sun or a sacred fire at specific times aligned with the movement of the day. For the Immortals, this meant that regardless of what was happening around them, regardless of the chaos of campaign or the exhaustion of training, there were fixed points in each day that demanded presence, stillness, and intentional thought. These prayer moments were functionally structured mindfulness practices, moments of focus and reset built into the architecture of the day at regular intervals. Morning rituals for Persian warriors typically included cold water washing, a practice that modern biohackers have rediscovered under the name cold exposure, followed by physical movement, a light meal, and a period of what we might call mental preparation. Before any significant physical training or military exercise, there was a deliberate transition from rest to readiness that involved the whole person, not just the body. Evening rituals were equally structured. The end of the training day was marked by collective meals, storytelling, and what the Persian tradition called the recounting of the day's deeds, an oral review practice that served the same function as a modern after-action review. What happened today? What went well? What failed? What needs to change tomorrow? This nightly reflection was not optional. It was cultural and religious practice, and it meant that every day ended with a conscious integration of the day's lessons before sleep consolidated them into long-term learning. The cumulative effect of these daily rituals over years of practice was an extraordinary degree of what psychologists today call metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking and performance with clarity and objectivity. The Immortals were not just trained bodies. They were trained minds operating inside a structured daily architecture that maximized learning, recovery, and growth simultaneously. Endurance in the long march, building cardiovascular capacity. The Achaemenid Persian Empire was, at its core, a marching empire. The legendary Royal Road, which stretched over 1,600 miles from Sardis in modern Turkey to Susa in modern Iran, was a feat of infrastructure that enabled rapid movement of people, goods, and military units across vast distances. And the Immortals were expected to move along it and across terrain far more challenging than a paved road at a pace that most modern recreational athletes would find punishing. Ancient historical accounts suggest that a Persian army on the march could cover between 15 and 25 miles per day over sustained periods, carrying equipment, weapons, and supplies. For the Immortals, who were the vanguard and the elite, the unit closest to the king and most likely to be called upon at any moment, the physical demands were even greater. They had to arrive at a destination not just alive, but ready to fight. That distinction is everything. Building this kind of endurance was not accomplished through short bursts of intense exercise. It was built through long, steady, sustained effort over years. Young Persian trainees walked and ran for distance from early childhood. They were taught to pace themselves, to find the rhythm of movement that could be sustained for hours without depleting the reserves needed for a fight at the end. This is exactly what modern endurance science describes as aerobic base building, developing the cardiovascular and muscular infrastructure to sustain prolonged output at moderate intensity. The combination of loaded marching, say carrying weapons and armor, with riding and intermittent high-intensity combat training created a physical preparation that modern sports scientists would recognize as concurrent training, developing both aerobic endurance and anaerobic power simultaneously. The body that results from this kind of training is not the specialized body of a marathon runner or a powerlifter. It is the general purpose, high-performance body, capable of sustained output, explosive power, and rapid recovery. It is the body built for life, not for a single event. And it is arguably the most useful body any human being can develop. Strength, combat skills, and the functional body. The Immortals were not bodybuilders. They were not optimizing for aesthetics or for performance on any single narrow task. They were optimizing for combat effectiveness across the full spectrum of what a soldier in their era might be called upon to do. And that spectrum was extraordinarily broad, which meant that their strength training, by necessity, had to be equally broad. A Persian immortal might be required to draw a heavy warbow hundreds of times in a single engagement. He might engage in hand-to-hand combat with sword and shield on uneven terrain. He might need to mount and control a horse at full gallop while managing weapons. He might need to carry a wounded comrade or a heavy load over a mountain pass. He might need to build a fortification, dig a trench, or swim a river. Every one of these tasks demands a different kind of strength, and the training that produced the Immortals had to account for all of them. The result was what modern functional fitness culture tries to replicate: a body that is strong in the ways that matter across real-world demands. The training included wrestling, which builds full body strength, balance, and explosive power in ways that no isolated exercise can match. It included climbing, trees, walls, ropes, and rocky terrain, which develops upper body pulling strength and grip in their most authentic form. It included throwing spears, stones, and other objects, which builds rotational power through the core and shoulder complex that transfers to almost every other physical activity. Importantly, the Immortals also trained with the actual equipment they would use in combat. Their strength training was not separated from their skill training. It was integrated with it. Drawing a warbow builds archer's strength. Wrestling in armor builds armor-specific strength. Riding builds riding-specific core stability. Every training session was simultaneously developing physical capacity and practicing the specific skill that capacity would serve. Modern sports science calls this specificity, the principle that the best strength training is the training most closely matched to the demands of the actual performance. The Immortals were practicing it 2,500 years ago. The modern approach, training inspired by the Immortals. Now we arrive at the part of this episode that I find most exciting, because this is where ancient history becomes a practical roadmap for your life today. Everything we have discussed about the Persian Immortals, their selection, their training, their nutrition, their recovery, their mental disciplines, translates directly into a modern approach to peak performance that requires no gym membership, no expensive supplements, and no special equipment beyond your own body and a willingness to be consistent. Let us build it out together. The foundation of an immortal inspired training approach is what I'm going to call the long physical day. Rather than compartmentalizing your fitness into one 60-minute session and then sitting at a desk for the remaining 14 waking hours, you structure your entire day around continuous low-level physical engagement. You walk whenever possible. You take stairs. You carry things. You stand. You move your body through its natural range of motion regularly throughout the day. This baseline of daily movement is the aerobic base that the Immortals built through their natural lifestyle, and modern research consistently shows it as one of the most powerful predictors of long-term health and performance. On top of that foundation, you build two structured physical sessions, just as the Immortals did, one in the morning and one in the afternoon or evening, separated by a period of rest and nourishment. The morning session prioritizes strength and skill work, the high-demand activities that benefit from a fresh nervous system. The afternoon or evening session prioritizes endurance, mobility, and the kind of sustained steady state effort that builds aerobic capacity without taxing recovery too heavily. This two-session structure is not new. It is the training architecture used by elite athletes across almost every sport. The Immortals were using it 25 centuries ago. Modern Immortal workouts, no machines required. The specific training practices that translate most directly from the Immortal model into modern life are the ones that use the body as the primary tool. Here's what that looks like in practice. Loaded carries are the single most underused exercise in modern fitness culture and were a cornerstone of ancient physical preparation. Picking up something heavy and walking with it, whether that is a loaded backpack, a sandbag, a heavy rock, or 2 buckets of water, builds functional full body strength, cardiovascular capacity, and mental toughness simultaneously. Start with 20 minutes of loaded walking twice per week and build from there. The weight should be challenging enough to make you work, but not so heavy that your form collapses. Over months and years, this practice will build a body that is genuinely useful in the way that ancient warriors' bodies were useful, capable, resilient, and powerful across real-world demands. Ground-based strength work, meaning push-ups, pulling movements, body weight squats, lunges, and variations thereof, builds the functional upper and lower body strength that transfers to every physical challenge you will face. The Immortals did not have barbells, but they had bodies capable of extraordinary feats of strength because they used those bodies against real resistance in real environments every single day. The principle is the same whether you are pushing a stone or a barbell. Progressive overload, doing slightly more than you did yesterday, week over week, is the mechanism of adaptation. Apply it consistently and the body responds. Carrying the endurance piece forward, the Immortal model strongly supports long, slow distance walking or hiking as the primary cardiovascular tool. This is not the sexiest form of cardio in the modern fitness world, which tends to favor intense intervals and metrics. There are heavy protocols, but the physiological adaptations produced by regular, long-duration, low-intensity movement, and improved fat oxidation, lower resting heart rate, increased blood volume, enhanced recovery capacity, are profound and accumulate quietly over time. Add a weighted pack and you have one of the most complete training modalities available at any price point, bar none. Finally, the skill component. The Immortals did not separate their physical training from their practical skills. In the modern context, this might mean rock climbing, which develops grip strength and body awareness. It might mean swimming, which builds full body endurance and breathing control. It might mean martial arts or wrestling, which builds explosive power, coordination, and the specific psychological resilience that comes from learning to function under physical threat. The specific skill matters less than the principle. Your physical training should serve real capabilities, not abstract metrics. Eating like an immortal in the modern world. The nutritional principles of the Persian Immortals translate into modern life with almost no modification, and they cut through virtually every dietary debate in the modern nutrition culture with elegant simplicity. Here's the core of it. Eat real food, not products, not supplements, not engineered nutrition systems. real food in its whole form: animals, plants, grains, legumes, fats, and the fermented versions of all of the above that have sustained human performance since before recorded history. This is not a radical dietary philosophy. It is the default state of human nutrition for the entirety of our existence as a species, from which we have only recently and disastrously deviated. In practical terms, the immortal nutritional approach for a modern person looks like this. Build your meals around complex carbohydrates, specifically whole grains like barley, oats, and whole wheat bread, and legumes like lentils, chickpeas, and black beans. These are your primary energy source, and they stabilize blood sugar, support gut health, and provide a steady release of energy across the hours between meals. This is exactly what an ancient Persian soldier needed to march 20 miles and still have enough left to fight. And it is exactly what you need to sustain focused, productive effort across a long, demanding day. Add quality animal protein: lamb, goat, chicken, beef, fish, eggs, in moderate amounts at each meal. Not the enormous portions that modern fitness culture often prescribes, but enough to support muscle maintenance and repair alongside the carbohydrate foundation. Complement this with dairy and fermented forms, yogurt and cheese, that provide the probiotic benefit that ancient Persian soldiers got naturally from foods prepared in traditional ways. Lean heavily on dried fruits, nuts, and fresh seasonal fruits as snacks and energy supplements. Dates before a hard training session are one of the most effective natural pre-workout foods available. Rich in fast-digesting carbohydrates, potassium, and magnesium. A handful of walnuts and a cup of yogurt after training provides the protein and fat combination that supports muscle recovery. And cook with olive oil. Use garlic and turmeric liberally, and drink water, clean, abundant water, as your primary beverage. This is the whole diet. No tracking required, no supplements needed. Just food, in forms your great-great-grandmother would recognize. The mental game: radical honesty and self-accountability. Of all the performance practices embedded in the culture of the Persian Immortals, the one I return to most often in my own life is the commitment to truth-telling, specifically the practice of radical self-honesty. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice, because it sounds simple, and it is actually one of the most challenging performance disciplines available to a modern person. Begin with a daily honest assessment. Every morning, before you start your day, spend 5 minutes asking yourself 3 questions without any spin, any self-protection, or any of the comfortable distortions we all use to avoid confronting what we already know. First, am I doing what I said I would do? Second, what am I avoiding that needs to be done? Third, what am I telling myself that is not actually true? Write the answers down if you can. Writing forces specificity in a way that thinking alone does not. Every evening, do the Immortals after-action review. What happened today? Not what you planned, not what you hoped. What actually happened? Where did you perform well and why? Where did you fall short and why? What will you do differently tomorrow? This is not a self-criticism exercise. It is an intelligence-gathering exercise. You are collecting data about your own performance with the same honest attention that a good coach would apply to an athlete under their supervision. The only difference is that you are both the coach and the athlete, which means your honesty with yourself is the whole game. The broader principle behind this practice is what the Persians understood when they made truth-telling a foundational warrior virtue. Self-deception is the most costly form of weakness available to a human being, because it is the one form of weakness you cannot see or address until you have already paid the price for it. The body that does not know it is overtrained, keeps training until it breaks. The soldier who does not know he is afraid freezes at the worst possible moment. The person who will not honestly assess their own performance cannot improve it. Radical self-honesty is not comfortable. It is essential, and it is free. Building your own brotherhood. Community as performance infrastructure. One of the most significant advantages the Persian Immortals had, one that no individual training program or dietary protocol can replicate, was their community. They belonged to something. They were part of a group with a shared identity, shared standards, and shared commitment to each other's excellence. And that belonging was not incidental to their performance, it was central to it. The research on this is not subtle. Social connection and belonging are among the most powerful predictors of resilience, motivation, and sustained effort that psychology has ever identified. People who are embedded in communities with shared goals and shared standards consistently outperform socially isolated individuals with identical or even superior physical and mental attributes. The community is not a support structure for the performance. The community is the performance infrastructure itself. Building your own version of this in modern life requires intentionality because modern life is designed for isolation. We work alone, exercise alone, eat alone, and consume entertainment alone. None of this is conducive to the kind of performance the Immortals achieved. So you have to build community deliberately, just as the Persian system engineered it deliberately. Find or create a small group, 3 to 6 people is the optimal size for genuine accountability, who share your commitment to physical and mental development. Train together when possible. Share meals together with regularity. Establish honest communication norms. A culture where the group tells each other the truth with kindness, where weakness is acknowledged and addressed rather than hidden, and where shared progress is genuinely celebrated. This is not a workout group. It is a performance community. The distinction matters enormously. A workout group meets to exercise together. A performance community meets to make each other better, and the exercise is just one of the tools they use to do that. The Immortals did not perform at their extraordinary level despite being part of a unit. They performed at that level because of it. That principle is available to you today, in whatever form you can build it. Start with one other person if that is all you have. The unit can grow from there. The Immortal mindset, what it means to be replaceable and irreplaceable. There is a paradox at the heart of the Immortals that I want to sit with before we close out this episode because I think it contains one of the most powerful performance lessons in all of ancient history. The Immortals were named for their apparent inability to die, for the fact that the unit was always 10,000, always complete, always undiminished, and yet every single immortal knew at all times that he could be replaced, that the unit would continue without him, that his absence would not create a gap because the gap would be filled. Most people, when they first encounter this idea, think it sounds demoralizing. If you can be replaced at any moment, what is the point of excellence? Why push yourself to the absolute limit of your capability if the unit goes on with or without you? But the Immortals, I believe, understood the paradox differently. The very fact that the unit could replace you meant that your value was not in your mere presence, it was in the quality of your presence. Anybody could fill your physical slot. What could not be replaced was the specific standard of excellence you brought to that slot. The warrior who trained harder, ate better, thought more clearly, told the truth more completely, committed to his brothers more deeply. The warrior left a mark on the unit that outlasted his physical participation in it. He elevated the standard. He raised the floor of what it meant to be an immortal. And when he was replaced, his replacement stepped into a unit that he had made better. This is perhaps the most profound performance philosophy available to any human being. Do your work so well, with such complete commitment and such relentless honesty that the standard you set cannot easily be undone. You are replaceable as a body. You are irreplaceable as a standard. Chase the standard, not the recognition. Build it high enough that it outlasts you. That is what it means to be immortal. The legacy of the Immortals, what ancient excellence teaches us today. We began this episode 2,500 years ago on the plains of Persia, and we end it here in your life today with all the tools you carry and all the potential you have not yet fully used. The Persian Immortals are gone. The Achaemenid Empire fell to Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, and with it went one of the most sophisticated peak performance systems the ancient world had ever produced. But the principles did not fall. Principles do not fall. They wait. They waited in the historical record, in the writings of Herodotus and Xenophon and the inscriptions carved into Persian stone. They waited in the food traditions and the physical practices and the spiritual disciplines that the Persian people carried forward through the centuries. And today, filtered through everything we know about human physiology, psychology, and performance science. They are as applicable and as powerful as they ever were. You do not need to be a warrior to live by these principles. You do not need an empire, a war horse, or a 10,000 person unit at your back. What you need is exactly what the Immortals had: a commitment to preparing your body with consistency and intelligence, a commitment to nourishing yourself with real food that comes from the earth, a commitment to recovering with the same seriousness that you train, a commitment to radical self honesty that refuses to let comfortable lies stand in the way of real growth, and a commitment to belonging and to building and maintaining the community of people who will hold you to the standard you say you want to reach. These things are free. They are ancient. They are available to every single person listening to this episode right now, regardless of your age, your background, your current fitness level, or your resources. The Persian immortals were not superhuman. They were human beings who took the principles of human excellence more seriously than the people around them. That is the whole secret. Take the principles seriously, apply them consistently, give them time, and watch what happens to you. This has been episode 97 of the Peak Performance Podcast. I am Brad Young. Thank you for spending this time with me and with the Immortals. I will see you in the next one. Stay disciplined, stay honest, and keep building toward the best version of yourself that history will remember.